If you've been watching this channel long enough, you know that I did a video about the Persian goddess Anahita, and I mentioned over here that Anahita was really similar to the Hindu goddess Saraswati. I actually got a lot of responses from that. So I had a lot of people say that Anahita is actually almost conflated with Ma Durga. So I was like, well, you know what the easiest way to solve this problem? Maybe not quite easy, but a way to solve this problem is to do some research on Saraswati. So that is who we are exploring today, and actually in a couple weeks. Saraswati is one of the main Hindu deities, so buckle up, let's go. Let's start off with a really basic overview of Saraswati and Hinduism. Hinduism is the oldest organized religion in the modern world. Most scholars believe Hinduism started somewhere between 2300 BC and 1500 BC. That's over 4,000 years ago. Theoretically, it originated in the Indus Valley near modern-day Pakistan. Unlike other religions, Hinduism has no one founder, but it is instead a fusion of various beliefs. It was a melting pot of different cultures and languages. Some of the people that arrived there integrated their belief systems with other indigenous cultures that also lived there. One of the more important aspects was the composition of the Vedas. This became known as the Vedic period, and this was during 1500 BC to 500 BC. The Vedas are split into 4 major texts and contain hymns, mythological accounts, poems, prayers, and formulas that are considered very sacred. The name Saraswati is revered in the Vedas and is one of the most mentioned. This is because Saraswati is also a personification of a sacred river. This is her first appearance in the Vedas. She is also identified with the goddess Vak, the personified form of speech. This mighty river, Saraswati, was in the northwestern parts of India, and the settlers worshipped her as their great mother goddess. There's some interesting information about the Saraswati River. Some people think it's an absolute myth, but there's plenty of evidence, and many people argue that it was a real river. But the problem is, we can't find it. Some people think they know where it is, but it hasn't been formally established yet. This is still a hotspot topic for scholars. For some Hindu beliefs, the birth of Saraswati went like this. In the beginning, there was chaos, and Brahma, the creator, wanted to bring some order to this disorder. Everything he created was kind of like mush. He couldn't make anything actually sustainable. One word: knowledge. That's all we need is knowledge, right? So Brahma decides to create Saraswati, who is born from his mouth and is actually the incarnation of knowledge. With Saraswati's help, Brahma was able to create what we have now, which is life. That includes things like the moon, the stars, the sun, everything. It has form now. Thank you, Saraswati. Saraswati is the goddess of knowledge, music, art, speech, and learning. She is one of the Tridevi, along with the goddesses Lakshmi and Parvati. The goddess Saraswati is often depicted as a very beautiful lady. She's dressed in pure white, and she sits upon a white lotus, and she's got some geese next to her. She's holding a few things. Sometimes she is generally shown to have 4 arms, sometimes just 2, but when we have 4 hands, there's quite a few reasons for that. So she could be symbolically mirroring her husband Brahma, who has 4 heads. Now, they all represent different things. So we have like manas, which means mind or senses, the buddhi, intellect and reasoning, we have imagination and creativity, and then lastly, self-consciousness and ego. Brahma represents the abstract forms of these, but she represents the action and the reality of all of those things. We also have the 4 Vedas, so all of her arms might be reflecting the 4 Vedas. In her 4 hands, she tends to hold items that also have symbolic meaning. So she's holding mala beads, which is kind of like a rosary, but they're there to do mantras. That symbolizes meditation, inner reflection, spirituality. Sometimes she's also holding a pot of water, which represents purifying water, and that's to separate things like right and wrong, things like morals, what's clean, what's not clean, essential from inessential. She's not somebody who's about materialism. She's not very capitalist. She is also holding a book, which is representing the Vedas, and that's the universal divine true knowledge, and is all forms of learning. Lastly, something that she tends to always be holding is a veena. It's a musical instrument, and that represents all creativity and the sciences, believe it or not. It is an expression of knowledge that creates harmony. She has a love for rhythm and music and for verbal music or poetry, anything that's an expression of creativity of your soul. Like I said earlier, she is often seated on a white lotus, and she has some swans or peacocks kind of around her. She sits on a lotus because a lotus embodies knowledge and experience of the highest reality. But even further, because she is wearing so much white, it usually means purity, true knowledge, insight, wisdom, that sort of thing, which is interesting because she's also a goddess of fertility because of her association with the river. So the swan is an interesting myth. It's a sacred bird, and in one of the myths, it's offered a mixture of milk and water, and it's able to actually just drink the milk alone. So in turn, that means that it's able to decipher what is good and evil. The swan is a symbol of spiritual perfection, transcendence, and moksha. Oftentimes we see a peacock in addition to a swan in her depictions. It's interesting because peacocks usually embody like beauty, colorful splendor, dance, and self. Sometimes it means vanity and ego. But a lot of times you will see that the peacock is facing Saraswati. So this is because we might embody all of these beautiful things. We still need to reflect on what Saraswati's symbolism means, doing it mindfully with wisdom and knowledge, and being able to do this in a good way versus a bad way. So the peacock is a reflection. Something that's also really interesting about Saraswati is that she is kind of feisty. So you'll see in our part 2 of our myths, she walks to the beat of her own drum and she takes no shit. So there must be something to true knowledge, right? Saraswati is not just important in Hindu mythology, but is featured in some Buddhist faiths and Jainism. The Jains actually idolize Saraswati for the same purposes, for knowledge and goodness. It's interesting because the Jains do not believe in a god or gods in the way that the Abrahamic religions do, or even Hindu religion. We all are capable of achieving perfection and being liberated from the cycle of birth and death. So in a way, the perfected ascetics are kind of like gods. They are people that we can look up to that might have been people here. Saraswati is one of those, quote, deities, but not really a deity in Jainism. But her influence is still very prevalent to this day. For some Hindus, Saraswati is celebrated every single year on the 5th day of spring. This festival is a time when a lot of the mustard crops tend to bloom. There's a lot of yellow everywhere, so it's dedicated to the goddess Saraswati because that's one of her favorite colors. Not only that, to honor her, a lot of people will help young children learn how to write letters of the alphabet on this day. There is, in some places in India, a unique ceremony that is held to help children who are like 4 to start just learning, not just about language. Speaking of language, Saraswati is also important because for some people, she is the deliverer of Sanskrit. Without her, there might not be written language. This is just a basic overview of Saraswati. We will be getting into more of the nitty-gritty in another video. I hope you enjoyed learning about this awesome Hindu goddess. Stay tuned for a couple weeks where we explore Saraswati's actual myths, so all the cool stuff. And make sure to subscribe to my socials at Kaiti Draws and leave a comment down below. Let me know what kind of goddesses, myths, gods, creatures that you want me to explore. Thanks so much. Stay tuned. Keep watching. There's a ton of cool myths out there. Stay safe.